Well, guten Morgen. No more dobre utra. We are no longer in the former Soviet Union. We are here in Berlin. But actually, maybe we could say dobre utra or speak a little bit of Russian because we are actually in East Berlin. This is where I live. Of course, it's no longer East Berlin, but this was the Soviet sector of occupation after the Second World War. And with that being said, because we're back in Berlin, I thought I would show you something, well, a few things, quintessentially Soviet, of course. We'll look at the 3 Soviet war memorials here in the city, and we'll actually dive into the story of the Battle of Berlin in April and May of 1945. So join me across East Berlin, but also probably at one point, West Berlin. Alright, so we are actually getting ready to head through the Brandenburger Tor. I think we'll actually go this way. But anyway, the Brandenburger Tor, in case you're curious, used to sit entirely within the Soviet sector of occupation. Hey, I'm kind of busy out here today. Anyway, the border, in other words, West Berlin, would have been right over there, across this street. And actually, if you see in the back, that dome, that beautiful building, that is actually the Reichstag, which would have sat right inside of the British sector of occupation, even though the Soviets got there first and hoisted the flag on top of it on the 2nd of May, 1945. So you know, a key date for Adolf Hitler was the 20th of April, or 420. I mean, he wasn't a stoner, but the thing is he was taking a lot of drugs. That's one very interesting thing that we know about Hitler. He was a very frail, sort of sickly man in his final weeks and months. I mean, the old Hitler of, giving fiery speeches, that was long gone. But anyway, the 20th of April, 1945, you would imagine that he would actually emerge and have a birthday bash or a birthday celebration. But actually, it was bad timing, because that's when the Soviets were encircling Berlin with about 2.5 million Red Army troops. And actually, the Battle of Berlin, you could say from that moment, really gets properly underway. But anyway, what we're coming up to now is actually the first of the war memorials for the Soviet troops who died in Berlin that was set up right at the end of the war. Whew, man, I mean, I come here a lot, and it always gives me chills. Actually, one of the other memorials we'll go to later, it has even more of a chilling effect because there's more soldiers buried there. And with that being said, actually, I was quite tempted to say that we almost have the whole place to ourselves today. There's not really that many people here, even though it's a Saturday afternoon. But of course, we always share it with more than 2,000 Soviet soldiers who are buried here, who lost their lives in the Battle of Berlin. So actually, it's estimated, from numbers that had come out after the war, declassified numbers, that maybe around 81,000 plus Soviets died in Berlin. And we're talking about a very short period. We're talking about really 2 weeks, more or less. So pardon me if I'm being repetitive if you've watched some of my videos from Central Asia, the former Soviet Union, but I think one of the things that really came across from being there is this understanding that the majority of the Soviet soldiers who died in Berlin were actually not Russians. This was, again, a massive multinational, multi-ethnic state, the largest state on the face of the planet. And actually in Berlin, it was really Ukrainians, Belarusians, and Polish. Poland was not part of the USSR, didn't become part of the USSR after the war, but nonetheless, the Polish played an active role in Berlin as well. So that's something to think about in light of this war in Ukraine, because, there's been some calls from, let's say, conservatives or ultra-reactionaries, but also, unfortunately, a lot of liberals and so-called progressives to actually have memorials like this torn down. And what an absolute disgrace to history that would be. And how bizarre, considering that so many of the people who are buried here are actually Ukrainians themselves. It's unbelievable. Just a complete rewriting of history that unfortunately a lot of people are pushing for. T-34 battle tanks. You remember them from Tashkent? And I think I said I was going to try to show you the ones here in Berlin. Now, I've heard it said many times that these were apparently, at least among the first Soviet tanks to enter Berlin in April of 1945, but they look brand new. But again, these tanks would have been manufactured in the Ukrainian city of Kharkiv or Kharkov. Well, next stop is East Berlin. Actually, we're already back in East Berlin. I keep forgetting. But next stop is actually the largest of the memorials in terms of the number of soldiers buried there. Whew, we have made it. That was about a 20-minute walk from the station, and to be honest, it seems like a little bit of a sketchy area. I guess just because it doesn't seem like you're in the middle of the city. It's very, well, more than just residential. I mean, it's basically just forest where we are, and that sort of makes sense considering how, well, there's 13,200 Soviet soldiers who are buried in the memorial that we're about to enter. Man, oh man, oh man, oh man. Yeah, I don't come here enough, for sure. It's really just extraordinarily moving, as they all are, really. And here it actually says, uncover your head. So I might as well take my hat off now. I think it's not necessary for you to do that, but if it's a mark of respect, I'll certainly, play my role here. But yeah, uncover your head. Here are the Soviet soldiers who fought in the Great Patriotic War between 1941 and 1945. They basically, well, they gave their lives for your future. Whew. If I remember correctly, and I think I do, you're in for something special. Where is it? Yeah, can you see that? The seal of the Soviet Union. Wow. We'll check it out on the other side. This looks rather similar, but actually inside there's a quite iconic quote from Joseph Stalin. So the memorials here never went through a process of de-Stalinization. Let me see if I can actually zoom in on this one. But what it effectively says is, the strength of the Red Army was that it had none and could not have any racial hatred neither towards other peoples nor the German people, and that they were raised in the belief of equality of all peoples and races and in the spirit of respect towards others' rights. And apparently within the obelisk there's 2 Soviet colonels who are buried there. Completely empty except for a family. Actually, it looks like a father and his 2 daughters basically running around playing in the memorial. And at first I was thinking, that's quite disrespectful. But at the same time, I mean, these Soviet soldiers ultimately fought and died so that people could do exactly that, so they can, think about their future and, enjoy their families and not have to worry about the misery of death and destruction and all the rest of it. So, maybe not the worst possible place to actually do that, but what do you think? Well, I nearly left without showing you these. How could we forget about these? And especially this one. Oh man, the hammer, the sickle, the wheat, representing the workers, the peasantry, the harvest, the abundance, which, well, the Soviet Union had not necessarily throughout most of its existence, but the goal, ultimately, of world communism, right? Well, here we are. We've made it to Treptower Park. By far the largest of the memorials, and honestly for me, one of my favorite places in the world for quiet contemplation and reflection and for trying to assess my own role in the world and where do I fit in with all of this. And yeah, I mean, I think you can already tell from the outside, getting ready to walk in, just how absolutely grand it really is. So, just stepping in here and we're about to see how just incredible it is in every way conceivable. But basically, the last 2 years, so right now I'm filming this in February of 2024, so for the last 2 victory days, and that's always a big event here, it's the day of victory over German fascism. People and political parties come to, lay bouquets of flowers and things like that. But given the situation in Ukraine at the moment for, these last 2 years, it's been kind of a very tense situation. Last year you actually had, Russians living in Berlin and Ukrainians living in Berlin sort of facing off with each other, and it became a sort of very ugly scene, which also underscores just how tragic the dissolution of the Soviet Union was, the splitting apart, breaking apart of, previously fraternal peoples, you could say. Now, one thing that I also found really shameful from last year in particular is the Berlin authorities deciding to ban a lot of symbols. I mean, they banned Russian and Ukrainian flags, which, you can kind of understand why they would do that, but they banned Soviet symbolism as well. And for the Berlin authorities, for German authorities to ban Soviet symbolism, it's really deeply distressing and disturbing. So, this would have been a major point of, let's say, pilgrimage for East German youth. If you were in the Young Pioneers, if you were in the Freie Deutsche Jugend, the FDJ, the, Youth League of East Germany, you would come here almost certainly, and you would basically commemorate the heroes of the Soviet Red Army who gave their lives for, the socialist system that then existed in the German Democratic Republic, or this part of Germany, Little Germany, basically. By the way, de-Stalinization occurred starting in 1956. So basically the toppling of Stalin statues and stuff like this, not only in the USSR, but across the, Eastern Bloc, as it was called, or the, Socialist Bloc, the Warsaw Pact. And the thing is, de-Stalinization comes to East Germany a few years later, but it never actually occurred here. Here you actually have quotes from Joseph Stalin, on one side in Russian, on the other side in German, basically still represented here today in 2024. All right, so there's actually 16 blocks. There's 8 on one side and 8 on the other. I'm trying to give you a sense of it. Maybe I'll have to take a shot of it later to actually show you properly. But the reason there's 16 is because that represents the number of Soviet socialist republics within the Union that existed at the time the memorial was opened. Now, when the Soviet Union started to fall apart, let's say in 1990, 1991, actually there were only 15 republics. So the 16th was the Karelo-Finnish SSR, or Soviet Socialist Republic. Now, what's interesting is that later on, Karelia, as you might call it, actually becomes autonomous within Russia. So it actually is stripped of its union, republic status. But that's why there's 16 instead of 15, and also I think aesthetically it sort of, it makes a whole lot of sense. Ah, man, I mean, here you have, for example, a Stalin quote alluding to the people of Ukraine, Belarus, the Baltics, Moldova, Crimea, the Caucasus, etc., basically, fighting slavery and, standing up for the Soviet people to actually, free Soviet lands. Pretty incredible, considering, again, the fragmentation of the USSR and all of the sort of, issues that's brought about in the world today. And this is my absolute favorite right here. I'm not sure if you can see him. Can you see him? I mean, you got all of the Soviet soldiers here representing, lined up, and then Vladimir Lenin for the win. Big Vladimir himself. And here you have I guess you could say the main attraction, the big soldier, as he's known. I'm not sure if you can tell. Can you see he's actually cradling a child and stepping on a swastika, actually breaking it in half? All right, let's see if we can actually have a little peek inside here. And always some flowers. So just a few right now, but usually tons of them again around, middle of May. Can't get too far in, but can you see the red star there? Just a little bit. And again, all of the different nationalities also represented here. Družba Narodov. And just like at the first memorial, we have these information boards here. And check it out. Actually, you can see construction of the memorial itself. Wow. Whew. And there you have actually the Reichstag, where we started everything earlier this morning. What do we have on this side? All right, so we actually have Soviet forces here in Berlin at the inauguration of the memorial. There you have the big soldier. Here you have the East German leadership. You actually have right there Walter Ulbricht, who was leader of the GDR for a long period until 71. He died in 73, but I think already a few years before they got rid of him. Basically brought in Erich Honecker. And over here on this side, who do you have? Wait a minute. The chief baddie himself, Vladimir Putin. Well, everybody, I think we actually managed to do it. We managed to go to all 3 Soviet war memorials here in Berlin, and actually we did it within the span of no more than about 4 hours. So if you come to Berlin, there's no excuse for you not to visit at least 2 of them. Let me put it that way. But definitely do try to see all of them if you can.